Welcome to Natural Recovery from Suffering. This is Scott Killaby. I am going to do this might not be interesting for people, certain people, and I'm not doing it to entertain. Um, I want to be really transparent. People don't always understand what I do on social media. See, when I had repression, it was all just about getting love and approval. It's all it was about. Although I would have denied that because I wasn't aware of the buried anger. So I didn't know that when I did something on social media, or even if I collaborated with someone, it was really just to get love and approval. I'm being honest. And I think that's the true for most people because we're all human. But I did something that is, I think, unique among people who are social media influencers. I did repression work and cleared the need for your love and approval and others. What that means is that my social media is a bit different, as you can see, because I take people on or I critique things. This is coming from somebody who had buried anger their whole life. So when you see me taking people on, if you have anger repression, be careful with your shadows because that has nothing to do with me. And it could just be that you don't like conflict. But anyway, I don't like to just I don't do it anymore. So I don't like to get on here to entertain. It's not if that's not what I'm interested in the moment. Sometimes I did a little funny podcast and that was just me having fun. But this is much more like academic, this one. And it won't appeal to everyone, but I'm not trying to because I'm trying to be transparent on social media. Like I posted something one day and someone said, "Well, that's not going to appeal to a lot of people." And I said, "No, that was a legal disclaimer. I wasn't supposed to get likes. I just needed that there." And they're like, "Oh, okay." Right, because I don't do things for love and approval, so ask me why I'm doing them. Because I don't always say it. I mean, if you want to know. But we want attention on the work because we know it can help people. I'm very confident with that. And that's why you see me a lot. It's not for validation or love and approval. It used to be. But now it's just pure energy, like boundless love. I mean, I'm reaching out. Here's another thing. If I would have collaborated in the past, it's like, well, how can you lift up my teaching then? But it's not like that now. It's like I know that there are important partners in the world and I haven't met them yet. It's like I'm looking for the loves of my life. Where are the people that already get the repression? They've already integrated it into their therapy practice. Where are they're just like some method in Germany, which I discovered there are some in Germany that focus on repressed emotions connected to physical ailments. Where are the communities that Dr. Sarno's students are in? Where are our allies here? That's relationship. And of course, it's to lift KI up, of course, but it's also to lift this topic up and to lift transformation into the mainstream, like real transformation and not just mindfulness, because that's not real transformation. Not when you can't be mindful of what's buried. So I feel like it's a new era and we're just like this little gadfly, but I don't care. I really don't. If you see we don't have many likes, it doesn't even faze me. There are some people who work within us and they get frustrated with that because they're like, this work has changed my life, Scott, more than anything. Nothing came close. But like nobody gets it. I'm like, well, that's partly us and partly them. It's a relationship. So if we're not really clear, or if we're saying stuff that just creates resistance, because repression does that, then we have to kind of let those chips fall where they do. And so what I'm doing now, I'm being really transparent with you. I'm looking to just go get KI well known because I know it can help people. I don't even care if my name is associated with it, frankly. I know that it will be. But let me tell you where I'm at. And I've been explaining this to Dan, my co-developer, so that to make sure that he and I are on the same page, and we are. And we've had to process to get here because KI is not here as a divisive viewpoint. That's not what it is. It's actually coming from a lot of empathy. Me and Dan were identified with empathy and codependent. And this is how this work got developed, is by getting to our buried anger, which creates codependency quite often. So you can see how feel that clinical feel to it. Why is there a clinical feel to this work, but it's not therapy? Because this work, from a spiritual teacher, me, within a clinical setting with me and Dan at our treatment centers. And so that's why you hear it, but we don't treat or diagnose disease. Dan and I are so against therapy, not all therapy, but and also the mental health field and the addiction treatment field. We have so many issues with it that for somebody to say this is therapy, it's like they don't even know us. They're not even listening. But that's okay because we just have to get louder and say, no, this was born against a lot of things in spirituality, the bypass, and against a lot of things in the mental health field, like the emphasis on diagnoses instead of trauma or repression, the root of things. Same thing with addiction. Let's get sober instead of let's resolve the trauma that makes you addicted, right? So it's archaic to us that the disciplines don't talk to each other, doctors and addiction counselors and therapists or spiritual teachers who work with someone don't have a clue about each other. We think that's disconnection. I mean, it's just like really old models. And a lot of people already understand the need for holistic measurement and integrated medicine, therapy, spirituality. So that's not a new voice from us, but we're a new voice in the mix because we can get to buried emotions here. Oh my God, this is the secret sauce. We are very skillful at helping people learn how to process buried emotions in an ongoing path to where they get to their unmet needs hidden with those buried emotions from childhood. That is finding safety and love within. That's the medicine that we need. Authenticity. So, although I'm not here to really today, I'm not here to entertain. I'm just going to give you that little introduction. And then I'm going to take the rest of the time to explain to you that the reason for this episode is just in case there's I say this, I used to post on social media. If I get 10 likes, I wanted more because I wasn't connecting with people. That's a disconnection to want likes. I'm telling you, it comes from our narcissism. But I don't have that. So instead, I don't have the need for more likes. I don't say I'm not a narcissist. I would say we're all just human. Can we just be human and conscious? That's what I'm going to be, a human that's conscious. And hopefully earnest to look at my unconsciousness. That's the most that any of us can do. But here I'm talking today about something that just might not appeal to a lot of people. But it's really important for me because I'm not looking for your love and approval. I'm hoping that maybe somebody out there, maybe a therapist, a researcher, some author who is an expert in BPD will reach out because I have something to show you about a lot of the mental health issues from a somatic repression perspective. We've discovered the mind-body connections associated with suffering. That's how we can help people in suffering. So we know the mind-body connections around it, avoidant attachment style, anxious attachment, fearful, many patterns, fight, flight, freeze is all connected to repressed emotions. We freeze so that we don't get angry. We fight so that we're not vulnerable. Those are emotions connected to that. So we found the mind-body connections for that here. And we help people discover that and learn a process to be able to feel and express their true emotions and be free, basically. And what does that have to do with this BPD? And am I qualified to talk about BPD? It's not about being qualified. You have to judge things like this based on the resonance. Because I've seen therapists who don't know what they're talking about with BPD. And it's not about credentials. It's about direct experience plus some important knowledge that we have to get from the science. It's experience with people and your own personal work. And I've done a lot of research in this area, like tons. And I know the leading authors and the leaders in this area. Why am I interested in borderline personality disorder? It's not anything that I ever had. I've never had the symptoms of that. I was in a close relationship with somebody who was diagnosed with that. It was profoundly profoundly transformative for me as a codependent. Codependents are often attracted to people with mental health issues and even addiction issues. But people who have codependency can also have their own issues. It's not that we're crystal clear always, but we have to believe codependency often comes from buried anger. So we're people pleasers, we're fixers, we're savers, we're the good ones in relationship with the ones that are not doing so well sometimes. And that's all division, and it's false. And it comes from, it's basically narcissistic, if you want to say it that way. But you can transform if you recognize your pattern. You can use your pattern, even BPD, to transform. If you understand what the mental health industry, or the, not industry, but the field, it's not an industry, but there's a pharmaceutical industry connected to it in some ways. There is a field which doesn't always appreciate the body. Sometimes you have therapists that are very somatically based. Peter Levine's somatic experiencing, that's a partner. He doesn't know about us yet. But if I ever meet Peter, I will say, thank you, Peter Levine, because your impact goes beyond the world of therapy. It's like Bessel van der Kolk's statement that genuine transformation happens through processing buried emotions and present moment awareness. These are all, to me, things that are going to help us, including KI, with things like BPD, when you bring it all together. Because, well, KI brings a methodology to the table that's very skillful, and an understanding from a somatic perspective what's going on with these mental health issues. Because we can take a diagnosis. We don't diagnose. We take people who come here with already having a diagnosis and they're still suffering. So we're definitely not going to go into the route of diagnosis because it didn't work. The treatment. That's why they come here. And they stop thinking of it as a condition when they realize it's unprocessed emotion, quite often, from childhood. And that's a hard thing for people to really, really get, because they have the buried emotions and they don't know that they have them. And so when you go to a therapist or someone who's been trained to diagnose you, they have reasons for that. I'm not saying good or bad right now, but it's distracting. That's not good or bad. It just caters to our unconsciousness. It's unconsciousness, not good or bad. It's not judgment. We're unconscious beings. And often if you go to a therapist or a doctor or a teacher, sometimes they're not aware that the observer is the observed. And so when you have a bunch of people studying BPD, they don't necessarily realize that many of them are codependent anger repressors who are interested in this topic just like I was, because I was with somebody with that. I've actually seen these researchers. I've been to their YouTube channels. I can see their codependency. They're leaders, they're authors in this area, and I want to talk to them about how the observer is the observed. And we cannot really understand BPD until we take a look at the filter that looks at it. The observer is often a codependent anger repressor that would even be interested in this topic, unless there's a real academic sort of, a personal disinterest in some kind. But people are motivated. We have to always look at the motivations of researchers, because trauma motivates us to find answers, often from our own personal experiences in life. And yet this is never really reflected in the research, that the observer is the observed. And so do we really need a bunch of really objective criteria? There is no such thing. The observer is the observed. There's a bias in the research already. Only certain people are interested in studying this, I've noticed, or talking about it on YouTube. And quite a lot of them, but not all. I'm not going to lump them all together. That's not fair. But many of them are codependents. You are my colleagues, and can I talk to you for a second? Before you go down this rabbit hole further, there's a dance that's going on energetically. And it's like, it's species wide. It's not about couples or people. It's a species that has trauma. So on one side of the coin, you have this mental health issue, which is what I'm going to focus on, borderline personality disorder. Okay, so what is not in the symptoms, I'll explain the symptoms in a second, is the true root of it. And that is has got to change. We have Bessel van der Kolk. We have the science now. The root is emotional repression and trauma. Now, some therapists really know that. So this is not a condemnation of therapists. It's a condemnation of our unconsciousness. It's a pointing to our unconsciousness so that we can shift this whole subject of how to end suffering into true transformation, like Bessel van der Kolk says. We have to get under the diagnosis. For anybody who's listening, I want to partner with you who's ready to get under it. I've got it in front of me, and I'm going to read the symptoms so that everybody has a sense of what it is. A strong fear of abandonment. This includes going to extreme measures so that you're not separated or rejected, even if these fears are made up. And this touches into narcissism. And people don't understand why, but it's not really narcissism. A lot of narcissism is not really an intentional, conscious activity. And to say so is an unconscious researcher or therapist who has not done their own work. And that's a strong statement, but I want partners, and I need partners who are conscious and who are doing their own work. The thing about this is, these fears, when these fears are made up by people suffering from BPD, there is some judgment or some quick shadowing that goes on by the researchers and therapists. They'll say, well, this is where it touches into narcissistic behavior. No, it doesn't. Like, I don't know what you're calling narcissistic behavior. That's fear of rejection and abandonment, mostly abandonment. You had it right. You don't need to say that the fears are made up as if that's an intentional activity with somebody who has a deep fear of abandonment. That's not a conscious activity to make things up. They are surviving, and until we understand them more, by understanding ourselves more, we're surviving with buried anger and codependency. We're not going to understand them. It's not an intentional activity any more than our codependency, any more that we intend to miss our own buried anger, for example. It's not a conscious activity. And all the research and the stuff that comes out of that, from that codependency, is not a conscious activity any more than someone with BPD who's making things up. So although I agree it touches into narcissism, every human being does. And we need to own that in the research because it's not there. And these diagnoses often elevate certain people and stigmatize them, including by saying someone with BPD has narcissism, not understanding trauma as a researcher because you don't do your own work, or as a therapist. So there's my invitation, loving invitation, to come and talk to me, because we have to go deeper than this. We should all call for, it shouldn't be me, it should be every therapist and researcher. Everybody who helps somebody should call for reform in the area of do your own transformative work. And then you'll understand these things better. Okay, symptoms may include a pattern of unstable, intense relationships, such as believing someone is perfect one moment and then suddenly believing the person doesn't care enough or is cruel. This can also look like narcissistic behavior, as if it's some sort of conscious objective to manipulate. Ridiculous. This is a misunderstanding of trauma, again, on that point. But not all researchers focus like that. There actually, some are aware of the trauma. That's a push-pull dynamic right there. There are mind-body connections associated with that right there that I want to help people with who don't understand it. So when somebody sees someone as perfect in one moment, it has nothing to do with the other person. Nothing. It's trauma. It's a projection. And in the next moment when they devalue a person, again, nothing to do with that person. It's a transference. They're not really seeing the person perfect. That's a projection that they need. They need love. We all do. It's, we're pair bonding creatures. We have these connections in our bodies. We need love. And so somebody with BPD has this push-pull dynamic. They're split in two, like everybody is. But they have an extreme version of it because of the trauma of abandonment or fear of that. And so the extreme version is like, in one moment, I need you. Don't go. Or you're so great, and this can feed the ego of a codependent who doesn't think they have an ego. That's the covert narcissism, by the way, if you want to call it out narcissism. But yeah, if you have a partner who is just really loves you and values you so much in one moment, that could be very turbulent for a partner in the next moment to be devalued by that same partner. And a lot of mental health issues have that. But those are all rooted in the same mind-body connections for all of us. And when we call somebody suffering from BPD, when we really think that they are, we'll miss these mind-body connections. These people need love, and they're afraid of it. And that's what creates that, I need love, and you're the perfect ideal partner for that. You're going to solve all my problems. That's an unconscious activity, a projection. And in the next moment of like, your shit is also an unconscious self-protective mechanism. It has nothing to do with the other person, except that, well, people with BPD, because they have hurt and sadness repression, that's what I want to focus on. They have hurt and sadness repression quite often because the fear of abandonment actually scares them at an internal level. They might feel that sadness or that hurt again to truly lose people. So you can imagine how they have to protect themselves. They need love. So it's like, I found the person. And in that moment, they really believe that. That's not a manipulation. They really believe it because they have to stay safe from their real emotions that are buried, the fear of abandonment and the hurt and sadness they can't open to. And then, because they have to protect themselves and they're not stable in their being, they're emotionally dysregulated, they have to shift over to devaluing and even worse, actually. I've been in a relationship with this. You get taken through the ringer and they can't help it. They have trauma. But with somebody there's the whole thing about BPD, it's relationship. And we researchers and therapists have to learn about ourselves in order to help them. And we have to learn that we may have buried anger and that we're trying to help somebody who we actually need more boundaries with in order to help them. And that's what I want to contribute to the conversation, is better boundaries in therapy, even better than that are there, better boundaries in relationship, and teaching people where boundaries come from. Codependents will have to get involved in the transformation of BPD, is what I'm saying. All therapists will have to do their own work to truly help people with BPD. And I know that's a controversial, and I'm going to stick to it, and I'm going to debate people on it. I'm going to be friendly, I'm going to be polite and loving, but I'm going to be direct because there are too many people who think that you can just help somebody. And it's false. You can't just help somebody as if you're an empty vessel without doing your work. And if I'm an anger repressor who has this motivation to help somebody, but I don't know it comes from my own trauma, I'm not really helping them in the way that I think. There's bias in the research. There's bias in therapy because we don't understand trauma fully yet. We're learning, just like we are everywhere, but we need to accelerate the learning. The researchers and theorists and therapists and teachers need to do their own work. That's my position on it. Because I think it's a critical point. It's not, to me, it's not a perspective. It's like, we have to do our work now. What are we waiting on? But I know people don't agree, maybe. I think this is critical to understanding BPD and these other mental health issues. Quick changes in how you see yourself. This is so important to understand about this mental health issue and where it really comes from. It includes shifting goals and values, as well as seeing yourself bad as if you don't exist. It's like the shift of the BPD, which can touch into, people think they have bipolar shifting in different ways, but this is, again, survival, where they're divided within themselves because of this trauma. They are not doing any of it intentionally. It's all unconscious. They don't even know where it comes from. They suffer watching it happen in their lives. They need people who are clear and conscious to help them see what's going on. Not people who study stuff in a university. More than that, we really do need to do our own work to help these people, because you see, even the relationship with the therapist, when you have certain goals in therapy that you think that your client with BPD is really focused on, they're going to shift. If you don't understand the shift and where it comes from, you really can't help them. You have to be on your toes with regard to this kind of relationship. And really, the therapeutic session is not really set for it, because if you meet with somebody once a week or every now and then without a really solid program, DPT does a pretty good job, I have to say, more than others. But just create a relationship with people. Even if we have to change the way we, you know, bill healthcare, people need an ongoing relationship, because they do not understand that when they're in therapy, that one moment they can have these goals that they are totally, I've seen it. I've seen people go into treatment and they have these goals and they're going to be sober with their BPD, and they have everybody around them believing it. And they'll have their therapist believing it, treatment centers believing it, spouse, because they have to believe it to survive. But it isn't real for them. It's a survival mechanism. So it has to shift over to disaster. I mean, I don't exist. It's all failing. I can't do this. And that's just how they survive in life, in relationship, until they process the trauma, the fear of abandonment, and the repressed hurt and sadness, because that's the root. And I think that's going to be in the science if it isn't already, but go look, ChatGPT, that the real root is the fear that's calcified in the body that they can't feel. They might have anxiety at the surface, but they can't feel this fear of abandonment. They act from it. It's calcified in the body. There's mind-body connections in there, and they just act from this frozen fear of abandonment, which creates a lot of these issues. But the fear of abandonment is so closely associated with the fear of them feeling and expressing what's true for them. They cannot regulate themselves emotionally, because their entire state is like an extreme form of inauthenticity. That's what I want to say about BPD. Is they cannot be themselves. They don't know what that is. They haven't even formed a solid ego, as we know. So many of us have kind of a false sense of self. They don't really even have that, in a way, at times. It's like they're missing. Their whole experience of self is kind of missing. And that's deeply creates a lot of suffering, actually. And so we need therapists and teachers who understand identity better, because they need to have a better sense of self. If some of these people with BPD go into spiritual practices, they can really bypass. Hurt and sadness repressors can really bypass in spirituality, because they miss the hurt and sadness repression. Any mental health issue that's rooted in repression, like BPD, that person who goes to spirituality is often still trying to disconnect from their body, but nobody's telling them they're there either. So if the therapists don't tell them that, and the teachers don't tell them that, who's going to tell them that? That's why we need reform. Who can tell them that when the actual theorists and the researchers and the therapists or the teachers don't do their own work with buried emotions? How would they spot the pattern and where it's really coming from? Because it's not coming from what you learned in a university. It's not coming from the concepts of any diagnoses. It's coming from the body. It's trauma, just like the trauma researchers are saying. But like, therapy has not gotten itself in line with the trauma research fully. And that needs to happen. That should happen in the next 10 years, like quickly, using transformative experiential work to help bridge the gap between the mind and the body. The mind likes its diagnoses. The body doesn't care about any of that. It just wants to stay safe and get love and hold emotion back and suffer to survive. And that's the reality of our lives. The diagnoses are the stories that we tell ourselves until we understand the body, until we're more embodied as a species. Threats of suicide. I mean, okay, let's go to, there's a lot of different symptoms. The periods of stress-related paranoia, loss of contact with reality, these can last for a few minutes, a few hours. This is a survival mechanism, is what it is. It's the paranoia that they feel is an extension of the frozen fear. The loss of contact with reality, that's how they stay safe. Many people with BPD are escapists. They have different ways of escaping: drugs, fantasy, all kinds of things as a kid. That's how they took care of themselves in a world that abandoned them. And so they go back to that state of disconnection and dissociation to survive. They often have bodies that are very dissociated. There's addiction often, because the emotions are so calcified that they've escaped those for so long that they're stuck in this pattern of just being paranoid, losing contact with everyday reality as a way to survive the trauma and survive relationships. They are very drawn to people because of the fear of abandonment, and they'll latch on to somebody, but it's too much for them, close relationship quite often, and they have to just check out of it and disconnect in ways that the rest of us don't do. But we can learn from them, help them, and learn from them because we all have similar patterns. That, well, so I was in a relationship as a codependent anger repressor with a hurt and sadness repressor who was diagnosed with BPD. And so I understand that it's a relationship. Most of it has to be transformed through relationship, including boundaries. So BPD requires more boundaries than other mental health issues. That's arguably a consensus among researchers and therapists, and I agree. If you don't have boundaries with BPD, you don't have a relationship because they don't have any boundaries. That should be a symptom of it, but it's really a symptom of most mental health issues. Boundaries are just authenticity. Somebody with BPD can't even come close to authenticity. Therefore, they can't have boundaries. They don't know what's important to them. They don't know what their needs are. They make those needs, they turn those needs into demands on other people, like keep me safe, don't leave me, love me, but I can't open to you. And so they really need to do, again, that deep work to see for themselves where all of that's coming from, because otherwise they're really suffering with this stuff. And the therapists are just, except for a few, like there's a few good therapies out there, are just really not helping them that much. Well, they are, but some are going into remission after a few years of DBT or something like that. But you have to understand repression. It's a lifelong thing. So we have mental health issues, of course, but later there could be physical issues. We know that hurt and sadness repression, if it's not dealt with, and if just the surface stuff is managed so that one looks like they're in remission, they're not really in remission from the trauma. They're just at the surface level, they've managed things better with more mindfulness and relational strategies. But truthfully, they, like everybody else, they have repression. And so we need to change the measurement in therapy. Instead of measuring just, are they in remission, or even is their anxiety better, very narrow measurements, we need to measure holistically over the lifetime of someone with BPD and other mental health issues, because it's not just BPD. They often have physical issues, like they hold the hurt and sadness in their stomach, for example, gastrointestinal issues, which they don't often connect with the mental health issues. So they'll go into one direction to a doctor, like many people do, and then they'll go over here for their addiction, and then they'll go over here for their therapy, but it's all the stomach and the same repression. So we need a holistic measurement across the board and track these folks instead of treating them in a insulated, disconnected way. And that requires the work of the people in the fields. That is not the work of this person with BPD. That's our problem, that we talk to people as if other people who help them are not relevant, which is archaic to me. We have to change it, like in the future, because it's not helping people to treat a stomach issue as if it has no connection to why the person gets angry all the time in relationship. Gastrointestinal issues are related directly to that anger of BPD, which can be explosive because they're afraid to be abandoned. That trauma response comes up and they cannot be vulnerable because of the hurt and sadness repression. So they get angry. And then they have relationships with often codependent anger repressors who can't get angry, who can't set boundaries. And then some of these have become researchers and therapists who still can't get angry and don't really need to be studying BPD until they do their transformative work. I'm serious. Because when I read some of it, it's like it's so disconnected from the body that I can't imagine we're going to be able to really transform in the future around these things. Threats of suicide or self-injury, that's often there, of course. It can be a very dramatic life, to be honest, with someone with BPD. Things can be fairly normal for a period of time and then just something really big. And that's a pattern that you just keep seeing. And I was in a relationship for a number of years. We didn't know what it was. He was struggling with it. And we discovered the hurt and sadness repression because he was open to this work. But, it's really struggle. I have a lot of compassion for him. We're not together, but we're very close. And in some ways, if I was going to go somewhere and I needed to have somebody know, like I'm traveling, I would probably tell him. So there's trust. There has to be boundaries. We couldn't be together. For me, that was for my health. And he's taking care of himself in different ways now. I don't want to get into the details of that, but I think that what we're going to learn, the takeaway there is boundaries. Because with BPD, you have to understand how they grab onto people, therapists even. They do because they're afraid and to lose. And so if the therapist or the spouse doesn't understand what their conditioning is playing into that, by not having boundaries and not being authentic, well, then it's not a person with BPD. It's a two-way street. It's a therapist and somebody with BPD who doesn't understand it. It's a spouse with codependent buried anger. It's both. It's a dynamic. It's not a person with a diagnosis. And I learned that in my treatment centers. People would come in with like mental health issues and addiction, and the parents would walk in the door pretending like they didn't have anything to do with that. But then they would say, "Well, can you turn him out in 30 days sober?" I goes, "Well, can you heal the intergenerational trauma that created him in 30 days?" We can get somebody sober, but what is true transformation? Mom and Dad, you have to come in here, because mental health addiction isn't a thing that people have. It's a dynamic in relationship. It's trauma. So folks with BPD are going to grab onto anybody who tries to help them, anybody who gets close to them, and they're going to have this push-pull dynamic with that person. So in other words, one moment they're going to have goals and interested and they're connected, and the next moment it's I don't exist and you're shit and I'm leaving. And if you're not prepared in the therapeutic session to intervene consciously with boundaries and directness and create a context for that person, a bigger context about what's going on for them, and include the repressed emotions, they're going to leave these relationships. I keep seeing people with hurt and sadness repression especially, but even more so, people with BPD with hurt and sadness repression going in every single direction, getting help from a lot of different people who don't understand that they have hurt and sadness repression. Again, it's like the doctor treating the stomach as if it has nothing to do with hurt and sadness repression. The therapist doesn't see the hurt and sadness repression, treats it like BPD, and then they've got, like anything, addiction, they go to a treatment center or a recovery room. There needs to be holistic measurement and holistic treatment for people with mental health issues. That's how I see it over a lifetime. If they can't afford it, we need to change the system, because this is healthcare costs overall. If you don't treat somebody holistically with BPD, they have perhaps cancer and chronic pain or other issues later that cost the system billions of dollars. I've got a blog on the Medium that shows how much buried emotions cost us overall. So to say that I think we're going to reduce health care costs when we measure and treat people over a lifetime, because we're going to reduce overall costs, even work productivity coming from trauma and all kinds of things. I think it's just reform that needs to happen. Oh, the wide mood swings is another symptom. Again, it can last for a while or not really very long with this, because they're in survival mode. They can shift quickly. It's like a strategy of their unconscious to switch back and forth. Can you see the dualities that they switch back and forth? So I need love and I'm afraid of it. And it comes through like, well, things are okay right now, but now they're not, I'm afraid. And that those mood swings are really governed by the trauma that's buried. It's not really the moods at the surface. So again, we go and we treat mood disorder, not understanding where that comes from. We don't just have moods randomly. We have unprocessed emotions, and our system is very intelligently creating the moods to keep safe from what we've buried. And even the depression, now we know from the new science that repression is under that. And a lot of people with BPD have depression, anxiety, and BPD touches into other mental health issues. It's very hard to diagnose for that reason. And sometimes they get misdiagnosed as a grandiose narcissist. It's all the mind, not connected to the body. Not the researchers are not embodied. The therapists don't know that they have buried emotions. I'm telling you, it's not just the person with BPD. Ongoing feelings of emptiness. This is a special kind of thing that they have. Many people have that, a feeling of like just empty inside, but not like this. I've had this described to me by people with BPD. This is a gnawing hole in the center of your being. There's just nothing there. And the life that some of us experience on a spiritual path, they would never experience that aliveness that I have. Their energy is dead in that way. And the interpretation from that energy is just, it's hard for them to even put it into words. Emptiness is a good enough word, but it's a deep abyss of darkness that they don't have any sense of where it comes from or how to access it in the body. Again, it's emotional repression, frozen fear. And then the last sign is that's a good one. Let's put this one last. Inappropriate, strong anger, such as losing your temper, being sarcastic or bitter, physically fighting. So this is again where they get mischaracterized as like a malignant narcissist or a grandiose narcissist. This is trauma. I've lived with a person like this. Well, it can feel manipulative. There's so much shit on social media that needs to just stop because people are being pulled into this shadow dance where it's like we look at people who get angry and we think, well, that's manipulative, controlling narcissist. It just lacks understanding of trauma and repression, just ignorant. And it's really hurtful because there are a lot of people who really are not diagnosable narcissists. They're suffering with BPD or even hurt and sadness repression. How many people are being pulled into the net of narcissism on social media who are just hurt and sadness repressors, who can look angry and even controlling or manipulative because they're so scared to attribute some sort of conscious objective to them when they're so scared and unconscious. It's just, I think, it's like drilling a hole through a head to try to end mental health. That's how archaic it feels to me. Try to end a mental health issue. The sudden bursts of anger are the way, it's like sometimes it's the only way that you can even connect with love. People can't see it. But when someone with hurt and sadness repression gets angry, often there's a deep split in their relationships, going often back to childhood. Being angry might have been the only thing they could have done because they couldn't open to the vulnerability and sadness that they bury. So how do you survive in a family if you can't be vulnerable? Well, even if you don't have BPD, you might be an angry kid because it's the only thing you can express. So imagine if you have parents who, because of their unconsciousness, they contribute to the development of BPD because the child can't open to their own vulnerability. Now imagine what the child has emotions. The child could develop into a dissociated, can't feel and express anything. Very common with BPD. But another thing that is common is that they can feel and express anger. They're not completely dissociated. They're dissociated around the vulnerable emotions. So in some ways, it's like, thank God they can feel and express something. That's how I saw it eventually after working with people and being in a relationship, because they're so dissociated that they need access to some emotion to connect to love. And people don't understand this about people that they call angry or narcissists, when sometimes it really is childhood needs for love and safety is what you're seeing, and repression. So just more compassion. A lot of us are codependent anger repressors who don't really have a lot of compassion because we don't really see what's going on in hurt and sadness repressors. That's why I'm so vocal. And against us, the harm that we do, the codependents who are, sort of pathologically altruistic sometimes in our shadow, so quick to shadow and call people narcissists who are just really afraid. And this anger, of course, the thing about the anger, this is the boundaries though. This is why transformation for BPD has to be relational, because this is their only connection to love. It's hard to understand, but imagine a kid who he gets angry at his dad because it's the only way he gets his dad's attention. He can't be vulnerable with his dad and connect in love. So if he gets angry at dad or she gets angry at mom, then it's like maybe they'll feel bad about it later and apologize, and then there's a connection. And guilt becomes a connection for somebody who represses hurt and sadness. They feel guilty. They apologize for their behavior. They get trapped into that cycle of acting out again to get love so that they can apologize. So if they have a partner or a therapist who doesn't understand that, they become part of it. You have to do your own work. We could not really ask people with mental health issues to just do work or transform. It just doesn't make any sense anymore to me. These anger outbursts need to be understood and studied better. They're coming from vulnerability repression. Can somebody please reach out so we can talk about how to study that better? Because this is close to my heart. Somebody close to me with this, and also, it's also just close to my heart because I targeted and even called hurt and sadness repressors narcissists. When I was in a relationship with my partner with BPD, I would sometimes lie in bed at night for like half an hour and just watch videos on grandiose narcissism. And I was learning, but I wasn't learning that my partner was a grandiose narcissist. I was learning about trauma and how people on YouTube don't pay attention to it and don't really live transformation. Because if they did and they stopped talking about diagnosis and they got into the body, they would see what's really going on into their own bodies. As I watched that, I was already embodied. I already saw that we just don't grasp BPD yet. If we're still calling them narcissists, we're not embodied theorists, and therefore we're not going to be able to help them, because those kinds of shadows are divisive and really say more to do about us. That's what I see on social media. And I'll just say one more thing about this. In my relationship with my partner, I discovered my own covert narcissism, to be fair. So if we're going to call people who repress hurt and sadness or who have BPD grandiose narcissists, we have to, instead of looking at that speck in their eye, we need to look at the log in our own. Many people who are helping people bury anger and do not know how to deal with people who are angry. Let's be honest. And so, in what way are we equipped to study it, to help somebody who's extremely angry when we're afraid of it? I want to leave you with that. I want you to think about how knowing, understanding, and transforming our emotional experience is critical to help anybody with a mental health issue, to help anybody with addiction, or frankly, to help anybody on a spiritual path. I hope you can see it and you'll join me. And maybe you know somebody who's out there studying or talking about BPD who would be interested in this perspective. Even if only one person listens today, maybe you're the one. So I put a link here to, I don't want to put a link to my programs. I might put a link to the my programs, anybody, come talk to me, because maybe there's somebody listening you may have BPD, but it could be hurt and sadness repression, and you just saw yourself. And some people will go, oh, shit, I have BPD. But let's just take it out of that realm, because it's all repression and trauma. If you want to come and work with that through an embodiment approach, an awareness-based approach, that's a good thing to come of this. But really, I want to go into the collaborations with people out there. So please think about who you know, or even on your page, that you could share this with. Even if it bores people, there might be one person that could hear it, and we can do something about this. Thank you for listening.